Snow fell hard that night, the kind of cold that even the wolves refused to run through. Jon Snow stood at the edge of the Godswood in Winterfell, his breath curling in the frozen air like smoke from a dying fire. He held the small bundle tighter against his chest, feeling the tiny heartbeat weakly under the thick layers. His son, his only son. The boy whimpered softly, barely a sound, but it hit Jon like a hammer. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he was about to do. His black cloak was soaked at the edges, snow melting into water, water freezing into ice. He could barely feel his fingers anymore. Maybe that was a blessing. Maybe the gods had mercy enough to numb him before he did the unthinkable. He had named the boy Aemon, after a man of honor, a man who had given Jon hope once, when he had none. It felt fitting then. Now it felt cruel. The words of the Red Priestess echoed in his mind like a curse he couldn't outrun. The boy carries the shadow of the wolf and the dragon. He will burn the world or save it. You must choose, Jon Snow. You must choose. He hadn't believed her at first. He had laughed even in his quiet, bitter way. He wasn't a king anymore, wasn't even much of a man, just a tired soldier wearing a crown of ghosts. And yet the dreams had come. Dreams of fire swallowing Winterfell whole. Dreams of his boy grown tall and fierce, riding dragons into cities and burning them to ash. Dreams where he saw Sansa, Arya, even Sam screaming under a sky gone, black with smoke. At first he had told himself they were only dreams. At first he had sworn he would never hurt his own blood. But tonight he stood here, shivering and hollowed out, knowing he had already made the choice the moment he left his chambers with the child wrapped in furs. The Godswood was silent, except for the whisper of the weirwood tree, its red leaves bleeding down like tears onto the snow. Jon stepped forward, feeling his boots sink deep into the fresh powder. He went down on his knees before the heart tree, resting Aemon gently on the ground. The baby blinked up at him with bright grey eyes. His mother's eyes, not Daenerys's. No, the mother had been another woman, a wildling girl he had loved briefly in the bitter cold beyond the wall, when life had seemed a simple thing, when the only thing he had to fear was death, not destiny. Jon pressed a kiss against the boy's forehead, tasting salt, his own tears, or the boy's, he couldn't tell. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking apart like ice underfoot. "I'm so sorry, Aemon. You deserved better than me." The sword felt too heavy when he pulled it from his belt. Longclaw, the old Mormont steel, the blade that had saved him 100 times over. Now it would betray him too. His hands shook as he raised it. The boy giggled, reaching up with tiny fingers, not understanding. Trusting him, loving him. Jon almost dropped the sword. His stomach twisted. He thought he might vomit right there, fall into the snow and never rise again. But the visions came again, unbidden. Flames roaring, screams. The boy, older, crueler, a king of ashes, a monster born of wolf and dragon blood, a monster Jon had created. "No," he croaked. "I can't let it happen. I can't." He closed his eyes. He swung the sword down. The snow turned red so fast it looked like the earth itself had started bleeding. The baby made a sound, not a cry, not a scream, just a soft, shocked gasp. And then there was silence, heavier than any storm. Jon dropped the sword. He fell backward into the snow, staring up at the grey, starless sky. His breath rasped. In and out, broken like something dying. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled. Jon did not move. He did not cry. He only lay there, feeling the cold crawl into his bones, feeling death settle beside him, whispering promises of peace he knew he would never deserve. In the Godswood of Winterfell, under the bleeding heart tree, Jon Snow had killed his future with his own hands, and the North would never forgive him. The snow didn't stop falling. It covered the Godswood like a shroud, burying the small, broken body under a blanket of white. Jon Snow sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, hearing nothing. His heart had gone as cold as the ground beneath him. When he finally rose, to his feet, his body ached like an old man's. Every step felt like dragging chains behind him. He bent down, his hands trembling, and picked up Eamon's tiny body once more. It was lighter now. Still, wrong. He couldn't leave him there. No matter what he had done, no matter what sin he carried now, Jon would not let his son rot in the woods like some unwanted thing. He deserved better, a proper burial, even if the gods turned their faces away. The castle was dark as Jon crept back inside, hugging the shadows. He moved like a ghost through the halls of Winterfell, every creak of the old stone a roar in his ears. He expected to be caught, hoped for it even. Maybe someone would see the blood on his hands and strike him down. Maybe that would be his punishment. But no one came. The North was sleeping its long winter sleep, and Jon Snow walked among the living unseen. He found an old crypt beneath the castle, a place where the dead Starks of generations past lay in their stone tombs, their faces stern and sad in the torchlight. Jon hesitated at the entrance, the cold creeping into his bones even faster now. "You don't belong here," he whispered to himself. But where else could he go? He chose a corner, an empty stretch of dirt where no lord or lady had claimed a resting place yet. Carefully he laid the child down. He dug with his bare hands at first, the frozen ground fighting him, biting his skin until it cracked and bled. Then he found a rusted spade and used that, shoving the earth aside like it might bury his shame with it. When the grave was deep enough, Jon wrapped Aemon tighter in the furs. He didn't look at the face. He couldn't. "I'm sorry," he said again, because there was nothing else left to say. "I should have been stronger. I should have found another way." The silence swallowed his words. No forgiveness came. He covered the body with earth, packing it down until the grave looked no different from the rest of the floor. He placed a simple stone atop it. No name, no carving, just a weight to mark the loss. As he stood there, the heavy doors of the crypt groaned open behind him. Jon turned sharply, heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. It was Ghost. The direwolf padded silently into the crypt, his white fur stained with old scars and snow. His red eyes glowed, faintly in the dark, full of a terrible, knowing sadness. Ghost walked to the grave without hesitation. He sniffed the mound of dirt, then sat down beside it, letting out a long, low whine that seemed to shake the very stones around them. Jon dropped to his knees, his strength giving out at last. He pressed his forehead against the cold floor and let the tears come, silent and bitter. Ghost stayed beside him, a silent witness to his shame. When the sobs finally ended, Jon lifted his head. He looked at Ghost, his last loyal friend, maybe the only creature in the world who still loved him. "I had to," Jon choked out. "You understand, don't you?" Ghost only stared at him, his breath steaming in the frigid air. The weight in Jon's chest didn't lift. It grew heavier. Something inside him had broken tonight, something that would never heal. He rose again, feeling less like a man and more like a wraith pulled from some nightmare. He sheathed Longclaw, though it felt wrong now to even carry it. And he turned toward the stairs, away from the grave, away from the boy who had trusted him. As he climbed back into the castle, the torches flickered and hissed, casting long, twisting shadows along the walls. Jon Snow walked back into the world of the living, but a part of him would remain buried in that crypt forever. He just didn't know yet how quickly the world would come to know what he had done. And when they did, the North would rise against him. It always did. It always did. The next morning, the North awoke like any other winter day, slow, cold, half asleep under thick grey clouds. Fires were lit in the great hall, stews boiled in the kitchens, and men sharpened their swords against imagined enemies. Jon Snow sat alone in his solar, the old wooden chair creaking under him as he stared at the fire. He hadn't slept. His hands were raw and bleeding, tucked under his arms to hide them from sight. Not that anyone would come to see him now. He had made sure of that. But secrets don't stay buried long in Winterfell. There was a knock at the door. Sharp. Heavy. Jon flinched like a man caught in a trap. "Enter," he said, his voice rough as gravel. Sir Davos Seaworth stepped inside, his face lined with worry. His good hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, not in threat, but not by accident either. "My lord," Davos said, glancing around. The room like he expected danger to leap from the shadows. There's talk, ugly talk. Jon didn't move, didn't breathe. "What kind of talk?" he asked flatly. Davos shifted on his feet, uncomfortable. "Some of the women are whispering. They say they heard a child crying last night. Down by the Godswood. They say they saw blood in the snow this morning." Jon closed his eyes for a moment. He pictured the blood, the way it had spread like ink through the pure white snow. "I will deal with it," he said, opening his eyes again. Davos frowned. "Jon, is there something you want to tell me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jon thought about lying. It would be easy. He could blame wildlings, bandits, even a sickness. Aemon was young and fragile. Winter took children all the time, but the words wouldn't come. He was too tired, too broken. "No," he said, "nothing you can help with." Davos studied him for a long moment. Those sharp old eyes saw more than Jon wanted him to. "You look like a man who's lost everything," Davos said quietly, "and a man with nothing left can be dangerous, to himself or to others." Jon didn't answer. After a beat, Davos bowed stiffly and left, closing the door behind him with a soft thud that echoed through the room. Jon sat there for a long time, listening to the crackle of the fire, feeling the walls of Winterfell close. Tighter around him, he knew it was only a matter of time. Someone would find the grave. Someone would start asking questions, and once the north smelled blood, there would be no stopping them. By midday, the whispers had grown louder. Gilly found Jon near the battlements, her face pale, clutching her little son Sam close against her chest. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him wide-eyed and afraid. "He's gone, isn't he?" she said finally, her voice trembling. Jon said nothing. Gilly tightened her grip on her boy. "What happened to him, Jon?" Jon stared out. Across the snowfields, watching the horizon blur with mist. He wanted to tell her the truth. He wanted someone to know, even if it damned him. He was dangerous, Jon whispered, barely able to force the words out. "I had to stop it before it was too late." Gilly took a step back from him like he'd struck her. "He's just a baby," she said, tears filling her eyes. "He was your son." Jon turned to her finally. His face was like stone. "So was the Mad King's son once," he said. The words hit Gilly like a slap. She backed away quickly, clutching Sam closer to her chest, shaking her head like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You were supposed to be better," she said, her voice breaking. "Better than all of them." Jon didn't move. He didn't plead. He didn't explain. He simply watched her turn and run down the stairs, her sobs echoing behind her, and he knew, with a certainty colder than any winter wind, that it had begun. The North would never forgive this. Winterfell itself would spit him out like a curse, and there was no sword sharp enough, no wall high enough to save him from what was coming. Not even death would be kind enough to take him. Now, the horns sounded at dusk, low, deep, and terrible, the sound of men gathering for judgment. Jon stood alone at the top of the great hall steps, watching as the courtyard below filled with grim faces. Northern lords, bannermen, common folk, they all came, torches burning against the creeping night, anger hardening their features into masks. They had heard the whispers, they had seen the blood. Some of them had even followed the tracks to the disturbed ground beneath the crypts. Word spread faster than wildfire in the north, especially when it smelled like betrayal. Lyanna Mormont stood near the front, barely taller than the men around her, but twice as fierce. Her little hand gripped the hilt of her sword tightly, her eyes flashing with fury. Sir Davos was there too, looking like a man dragging himself to his own hanging. He refused to meet Jon's eyes, and standing beside Davos, Sansa. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were not. They were cold, hard, full of betrayal so sharp, Jon felt it cut deeper than any blade. He had hoped somehow that Sansa would understand. That family would stand with him, but she had always been smarter than him. She had always known what the North demanded. Jon descended the steps slowly, feeling every gaze pierce him like 1,000 knives. When he reached the bottom, Sansa stepped forward. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice carrying over the crowd. Jon said nothing. Sansa's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Is it true?" she repeated louder now. "Did you kill your own son?" The silence that followed was crushing. Jon opened his mouth. No words came. He tried again. "I did what had to be done," he said finally, the words tasting like ash. A ripple went through the crowd. Disgust, horror, rage. Lyanna Mormont stepped forward. "There are monsters beyond the wall who would show more mercy to their blood," she spat. "You are no Stark. Not anymore." Jon didn't flinch. He accepted it, welcomed it. Sansa raised her chin, her voice trembling slightly now, but she kept it steady. "You broke the sacred trust," she said. "The blood of your blood. No matter what you feared he might become, he was still your child." Jon looked around. At them all. They were right. He had betrayed everything he ever claimed to stand for. "I know," Jon said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know." That was the worst part. He knew. And still he had done it. Sansa turned to the crowd, her voice rising. "Winterfell must be ruled by the old ways. The North remembers. The North does not forgive blood crimes." The people roared their agreement. Jon stood still as a statue, letting their hatred wash over him like a wave. He didn't defend himself. "What defense could there be?" Sansa stepped closer. "You will leave Winterfell before the sun rises," she said, cold and final. "You will ride alone. No banner, no protection, no home." Lyanna Mormont added, her voice sharp as a blade, "And if you ever return, we will hang you by the neck from the walls you once swore to defend." Jon bowed his head. "I will go," he said simply. No one thanked him, no one wept. They turned their backs on him one by one until Jon stood alone in the cold, the torches flickering against the falling snow. Ghost whined low at his side, but did not leave him. It would have been easier if they had killed him. He would have welcomed a sword in his gut. But exile was a slower death, a colder one. Jon turned, not toward his chambers, but toward the stables. He had no desire to spend another night within these stone walls. He would ride now, in the dark, alone. He would ride until Winterfell was just a memory. Until Aemon's laughter, which haunted every corner of this place, faded into silence. As he saddled his horse, he paused only once to look back. The walls of Winterfell loomed behind him, distant and uncaring. Jon Snow swung himself into the saddle, the snow crunching under Ghost's paws beside him. He didn't look back again. The North had cast him out, and the long road beyond the wall, the road of true exile, awaited him, where no gods, no men, and no forgiveness could ever find him again. The forest swallowed him. Beyond Winterfell, beyond the frozen fields and scattered farms, the true North stretched wide and merciless. It was no place for men, especially not in the dead of winter. But Jon Snow had stopped thinking of himself as a man the night he buried Aemon. He was something else now, a broken thing, a shadow. Ghost padded silently beside him, their breaths puffing white into the night air. The horses' hooves crunched through layers of ice and snow, each step harder than the last. No banners flew for him. No songs would be sung. The wall. loomed in the far distance, an endless blue line against the dark sky. Jon hadn't intended to go back to it. He didn't belong there any more than he belonged anywhere else. But his horse seemed to know the way, and Jon had no will left to argue. By the third night, supplies ran low. Jon made camp under a twisted pine, wrapping himself in his cloak, sharing body heat with Ghost. Sleep came in snatches, haunted by visions. Aemon's laughter turned to screams. Daenerys's face, scorched and ruined, whispered accusations he couldn't bear to hear. He woke, gasping, drenched in sweat despite the freezing cold. Ghost whined low, ears pricked. Something was coming. Jon sat up slowly, hand resting on Longclaw. The night was thick with mist, the trees whispering secrets he didn't want to know. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow moving through the fog. But then he saw it clearly. A figure, hooded, walking toward him across the snow, barefoot, leaving no tracks. Jon stood, sword drawn, heart hammering. "Who goes there?" he called out, his voice cracking. The figure said nothing, just kept coming. Closer now, Jon could see it was a woman, or what had once been a woman. Her skin was pale, almost blue, her hair hanging in frozen strands. Her eyes were wrong, empty, as if whatever soul she had was long gone. A wight, he thought grimly. Another cursed remnant of the long war he had fought and thought he had ended. He gripped Longclaw tighter, ready to strike, but the woman raised her hand slowly, not in attack, but in offering. In her palm lay something small, something shining. Even in the dark, Jon hesitated, confusion slicing through his fear. He lowered his sword a fraction. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough. The woman tilted her head, almost childlike. Then she dropped the object into the snow and vanished, swallowed by the mist as if she had never been there at all. Ghost snarled low, circling Jon protectively. Jon approached the spot carefully, boots crunching the snow. At his feet, half buried, lay a shard of obsidian and dragon glass, black and sharp as sorrow, and wrapped around it was a scrap of cloth. Jon picked it up, heart sinking as he unwrapped it. It was a piece of a baby's blanket, Aemon's blanket, the very one Jon had wrapped his son in before. He stumbled back, breath catching in his throat. How? Why? The gods would, the grave, the gods themselves. Had they cursed him? He turned, scanning the mist, but the figure was gone. Only the silent trees watched him now. Jon shoved the blanket into his cloak and mounted his horse, kicking it into a desperate gallop. Ghost kept pace beside him, ears flat, teeth bared. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to get away from the thing he had done, away from the thing that seemed determined to follow him. But you can't outrun your own blood, not even beyond the wall. As the sun began to rise, pale and cold and lifeless, Jon saw the wall looming closer. A monstrous thing, cracked and broken from the wars, but still standing, and standing before the broken gates, waiting for him like a spectre from the old world, was a figure cloaked in black. Not an enemy, not a wight, a man. A man Jon had thought. Long dead, Benjen Stark, Uncle Benjen. His face was half shadow, half frostbite, his voice a hoarse rasp carried on the wind. "Welcome back, Jon Snow," Benjen said, "but you don't come as a brother of the Night's Watch anymore. You come as something worse, something colder, something cursed." Benjen Stark stood like a ghost against the ruins of the wall, the dead wind, tugging at his frozen cloak. Jon Snow dismounted slowly, heart pounding hard in his chest. He wanted to believe it wasn't real, that the cold had driven him mad. But Ghost stood still beside him, hackles raised, and that was proof enough. Jon stepped forward, wary. "Uncle," he said, voice raw. Benjen tilted his head, almost curious. "You wear the face of a man," he said, "but your soul is hollow." Jon flinched. He opened his mouth, but no defense came. Benjen approached slowly, each step crunching in the snow. His skin was pale, half dead, his eyes burning with something older than anger. "You crossed the line," Benjen rasped. "Blood crimes, betrayal of kin. The old gods see, boy, the old gods remember." Jon bowed his head. "I did what I had to." Benjen laughed, a dry, broken sound. "That's what they all say, before winter takes them." The dead behind the wall were stirring. Jon could feel it, the way the mist shifted, the way Ghost growled low in his throat. "They're coming," Benjen said. "For you." Jon tightened his grip on Longclaw. "Let them come." Benjen stepped closer until Jon could smell the rot on him. "You don't understand, boy. This is no army of the dead you fought once. This is something older, something the gods themselves turned away from." Jon stared at him. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Benjen's ruined hand pointed at the frozen wasteland beyond the wall. "You must walk alone," he said, "into the very heart of winter. And there, if you still have a soul left, maybe you can earn your death." Jon swallowed the knot in his throat. He had no choice. There was no place left for him anywhere else. Without another word, he mounted his horse again. Ghost whined but followed, and Jon Snow rode into the white wasteland where even memories froze and shattered, where forgiveness was just another ghost. The farther Jon traveled, the less human the world became. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes. The rivers ran black under layers of cracked ice. The sky itself seemed to sag lower, pressing down on him like a great weight. Days blurred into nights. Time lost meaning. Sometimes he saw shapes moving in the mist. Men, beasts, things he could not name. They whispered as they passed. Voices, hissing like dead leaves. "Eamon! Eamon!" Jon pressed onward, fists tight around Longclaw's grip. Ghost stayed close, but even the direwolf grew leaner, warier. The land itself wanted them dead. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Jon reached a place where the snow ended, not because the cold had lessened, but because the ground was pure ice. A frozen lake stretched before him, black and gleaming, under a blood-red sky. At the center of the lake stood a tree, impossibly ancient, leafless, its trunk split open like a wound. Jon dismounted. Ghost stayed at the edge, whining. He approached the tree, and there, tied to the roots with chains of ice, was the shape of a boy, small, fragile, eyes closed as if sleeping. Eamon. Jon's heart shattered all over again. "No," he whispered, falling to his knees. "Not again." The boy opened his eyes, bright grey, filled with sorrow. "You killed me, father," Eamon said, voice like a blade through Jon's chest. "And yet you cannot let me go." Jon reached out, but the chains bit into his fingers, freezing his skin. "You were meant to save the world," Jon whispered, "not destroy it." The boy smiled sadly. "You were meant to love me, not fear me." Jon sobbed, full and broken. The tree shuddered, groaning like some ancient beast, and from the darkness all around, the lake, figures rose, whites but worse, memories twisted into monsters, Daenerys burning, Ygritte bleeding, Robb Stark, throat cut and eyes wide, all the dead Jon had ever loved, and leading them, Benjen, grim and cold. "Choose," Benjen called. "Stay and be chained by your sins, or sever yourself and find peace." Jon knew what he had to do. He raised Longclaw high. The boy, Eamon, looked at him with trust, the same trust Jon had once betrayed. This time there would be no betrayal. Jon drove the sword not into the boy, but into his own chest. Pain exploded through him. He gasped, feeling the warmth of life leave him. The white screamed and vanished like smoke. The chains shattered. The boy smiled once more and disappeared like mist on the wind. Jon fell backward into the snow, staring up at the endless, red-streaked sky, and for the first time since the night under the Guardswood, he felt peace, real, terrible, beautiful peace. Beautiful peace. When Jon opened his eyes again, he was lying in the snow, alone. Ghost sat nearby, watching him with sad, wise eyes. The lake was gone. The tree was gone. The frozen wasteland was just emptiness now, stretching forever in every direction. He tried to move, but his body was too weak. He had left too much of himself behind. He smiled faintly. It didn't matter. He had made his choice. He had let go. Slowly, he lifted one hand, trembling, bloodied, and rested it on Ghost's thick fur. The direwolf pressed closer, warm and solid against his side. Jon looked up at the endless, starless sky, feeling the last of the cold creep into his bones. "No more kings," he whispered. "No more wars. No more betrayals. Only silence. Only rest." The snow fell heavier now, blanketing him, hiding him from the world that had forgotten how to forgive. As darkness swallowed him whole, Jon Snow, the last son of Winterfell, the betrayer and the betrayed, the father and the killer, finally found his place. Not as a king, not as a brother, not even as a man, but as a ghost in the snow, where he belonged, where no one would remember his sins, and no one would ever ask for his forgiveness again.